Look, all this right here.
Well, expectation she doesn't like what she does, but she's still here to do all types of things. But most of them go actually, they do.
Larry, you feel up to a prayer? Larry! We're going to stop. Larry's going to lead us in a prayer.
Father, we thank you that you would help to take care of
Lead even those who were leaders among the Jews, but they were going to lead. He was set on leading them out of the Judaism that had refused to believe in Jesus. He was spirit-filled. He did miraculous. He did miracles, and he was definitely a defender of the gospel. So you get that in your head, and you kind of know this is a very substantial guy. His boldness brings him into conflict with the Jewish group. And we'll see that how it just kind of unfolds, and it becomes real obvious. He's then fought against God. So he's got quite a list of things that they are holding him on. You might remember that he is also one of the ones that were selected to take care of the Grecian widows. He was one of those men. We don't know necessarily who is really standing up for Christ. He was definitely converted and to understand what the significance was. So we go.
with Stephen, would it be safe to say that he was falsely accused and made an example with compared to like Jesus was, and accused?
Say that again. He's distracted me in a good way.
The temple. Would it be safe to say that he was compared to Jesus before Jesus was crucified? Because Jesus
Necessarily, I do see he would be a good comparison to the Apostle Paul. A great comparison to Paul and somewhat to Peter, because these guys. Yes, Stephen was a great example, and his story is just outstanding. So as you and I look at,
Making one more adjustment. Burn it up.
and laid hands on. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, sir. Who belonged to the synagogue of the freedmen, as it's called, and of the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking. Probably spirit-led, but he's making his decisions as well. Then we come down to verse 11. Then they secretly instigated men who said, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses." The synagogue of the freedmen were Jews who had once been slaves. And so it's kind of interesting to think this kind of slavery. We've often talked about the difference in first century slavery and the slavery that we have known here. But there was definitely a time when there was this sense of freedom. They were free, as able to do as they were free. And the troubles continue. And yet these are, when you read it in the scriptures, you're reading it from a spiritual point of view. We look at it now from just a physical point of view. We see the conflicts and stuff. I don't know if there's still a spiritual element to that or not. Whether it's still something that God would speak of in terms similar to this. I don't generally go that route. I see it that they played their part. They fulfilled the role. They were God's instrument in many ways to be able to bring some judgment. But we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God. That'll get you in trouble. Although, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and all the other crew, you would think they'd be in some kind of trouble for creating this false narrative to where, here we've got these fake witnesses. These have been paid, or they've been forced, or who knows. But they will say anything. They were unable to deal with him honestly. I think that's a big thing. There wasn't an honest way. Now, what would leaders? You got Stephen over here. Stephen is a spiritual man, but he understands something that these don't. It seems to me that there would have been at least some desire to bring that together. The Pharisees, or the leaders, are afraid. They're afraid that they're about to be, I don't know if they're going to be the people themselves. You remember, we've talked about that. But here we've got, I think, something that's pretty much the same. We've got Stephen, and we've got these leaders, and the leaders don't know what to do with him. What happens if they just let him go? If they cannot reconcile, and rather than condemning Stephen, they let him go. We've seen some of that in an earlier chapter. People are going to want an answer. They're going to want to know. And if they start believing Stephen and others like him,
the biggest issue here is Jesus even said it himself that the Pharisees didn't believe because they weren't part of this flock.
Yeah. There was a declaration. He dealt with them so long, and he said that they're just, they're doing this themselves. The kind of that same idea as God's letting the children of Israel just go their way. They've determined this evil, and it could be something very similar to that as well. But as you watch this unfold, Stephen becomes more and more of a headache, a greater problem.
Look at what the state of Jewish religion was at this point in time. 400 years between the last of the prophets and now, and where had the Jewish religion gone?
Yeah.
It had become political, and it had become about money.
Right.
The throwing,
absolutely.
The throwing the people out of the temple courtyard was because they weren't worshiping. It was a business to them.
Yeah.
Thing they believed in.
Yeah.
Not that they believed, because it was no longer about religion.
I agree. Yes.
Some people were. I don't want to go too far and say.
Sure seems like there weren't many of those.
No, there weren't.
Yeah. The character of the leadership of the Jewish nation had really sunk to some deep lows by this time. So here they are in verse 12, done what they were supposed to do. They made the people around angry, these scribes and others, because they were basically saying the same thing without saying it verbally, that these that had been bought off were saying. And so they became a pack, a war pack, or a pack of maybe a team from the Jews to stop this stuff. It didn't matter how, it didn't matter what. This stuff had to stop. And Stephen happened to be the one in particular. You know, it's interesting. There could have been other similar examples from other leaders. You know, you think about the different ones that were full of the Spirit, full of faith, the ones they chose for taking care of the widows. So, you know, he wasn't the only one with this stellar character. The others appeared to be the same type person. But this is the story that has taken our narrative. So this is the one we're spending some time with. They stirred up the people, though, and the elders, and the scribes, and they came upon him, and they seized him. They brought him before the council. So here he is again. And they set up false in the temple, that holy place. And also they spoke against the law of Moses. Just a quick thought on the speaking against the law. Paul was accused of this for a long time as he continued to teach. We picked it up in 2 or 3 of his writings. See Romans, Galatians, and there are some mentions in others. But those 2 books spend a lot of time on how it was not the defeat or the problem with law wasn't the law. It was the people who were supposed to be keeping it. And so because of that, God had to come up with another plan. I knew we know that he had these things in his mind from before, even the beginning. But there was such a hold that the Jews had. They just had to try to get something. And the one thing was circumcision, that they were required at him. All who sat in the council saw that his face was like the face of an angel. I wonder what that felt like. You know, here you are giving this guy a hard time, and his face looks like an angel. Wonder what angels look like. John, you did a study. We didn't get the face of angels, did we?
They don't look like this.
But whatever it was, they knew what it was. And so that was that conflict with Stephen. The next verse is, I hope this works better, and I'm afraid it will. But I want us to look together at chapter 7. I want us to read it together. One of the things that Stephen has done in this dissertation almost in chapter 7 is lay out pretty much everything in their history. In the history from Abraham and the things that were a part of that process that ultimately is what got him crucified. Because at the end of this, he's going to say, and you did it. All this stuff about his fathers and all of this, and then here comes the Messiah, and you killed him. You murdered him. But he builds up and shows that if he was consistent with the prophets and consistent with the other, those who had spoken, that they would never have crucified the Messiah. So let's walk through this together, and we'll break it here every once in a while. The high priest, and he begins here with Abraham. Because Abraham was the father of the nations. He was a great man of faith. So much of the Jewish history starts here. And so, to God, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. And he said to him, "Go out from here." This is what Abraham was told to do. Go out from here, from your land and from your kindred, and go into a land that I will show you. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans, Babylonians, the promised land. I'll do something here in a minute that will talk about that promise, but just understand the promise is being fulfilled in the life of Abraham, even though the Jews in the day of time of the first century are not really obeying and doing what God wanted. At that time, they did at least try to obey. God removed him from into the land in which you are now living. Yea, or yet he gave him foot's length, but he promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him, though he had no child. So there's reference here to another part of the story. But Abraham was now in a handy place with working with God, and there were some good things happening. He fleshes that out, but he didn't have a child, and we'll hit this again in a minute. And yet he was supposed to be the father of nations, father of many nations, and it does work, but it works or goes through his lineage, through his children. And God spoke to this. In fact, here's what God said to Abraham: that his offspring would be sojourners in the land belonging to others. Just keep those thoughts in mind. We'll discuss what he's talking about. But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. Where are they, and what's happening when they are? I ran right over it and I meant to stop. Worship me in this. Let's just finish it off. Hit it down. So as we're watching something unfold that became a part of history. We know the rest of the story. We're aware of what is going to happen. And so, unfaithfulness. This is setting up what God wanted the children of Israel to be. He gave him the covenant of circumcision. On the 8th day, every child that was born was to be circumcised. And so Abraham became the father. And here's where his lineage went. The father of Isaac. And he circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob. And Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. This is a list of the patriarchs. They were Jacob's sons. There were 12. They will become what we call tribes. They are families. And I think Abraham was 100 and Sarai was 90. And so that was a miraculous thing. So Jacob, of the 12 patriarchs, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. He's going to make reference to parts of the story, but those names, I'm sure, ring real true as we think about as the knowledge of the Old Testament, and especially a couple of these names are long-term used in the Scriptures. The patriarchs jealous of Joseph, and they sold him into Egypt. So these guys, they got jealous of their brother, king of Egypt, who development is, he's telling the story about just how these guys were, who they were, how they were working together, what was significant about Joseph being sold into slavery, and they lied to their father, and then what happened? What was the huge problem after that? A huge famine. Remember the famine? And it was so bad that literally it had lasted long enough that resources were gone. And so they were, these Jacob's sons are going to leave and look for food and look for a way to eat and maybe even go to another place. He says, I'm going to fix something. He doesn't just get you out of trouble. There's a place he can use you in. I think that's kind of a basic principle. Maybe it's not real in every case, but he didn't just rescue Joseph. Joseph now is going to have a prominent impact on the whole story. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and notice what he did with him. He made him ruler over Egypt and over all of his household. You'll be over the household of Pharaoh. Now, there came a famine throughout Egypt, Canaan, and great affliction, and our father could find no food. He's up in years as well. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers on this first visit. So he's going to send his children. Is he going to send them all?
No.
Keeps one back. Which one?
The youngest.
Yeah, the youngest, Benjamin. He had become his favorite. Maybe it's just brothers came to Egypt. They didn't recognize Joseph. And so the first time there were some things that Joseph did, and leaving money in their bags, things of that nature. But when he comes this time, Joseph says, I'm your brother. I'm Joseph. Now, what had happened to him in the meantime is the grains and things of that nature. So he was the one the brothers had to go to and to see about getting for sure that Jacob isn't going to, or Joseph isn't going to come back and clean house. So they're pretty cautious. And Joseph sent and summoned Jacob, his father, and all of his kindred, of Hamor and Shechem. So Abraham had been making plans. I want to spend a little time here talking about the promise to Abraham. It is central to the history that we read from Abraham through. But God confirms this. He confirms. Will God fulfill whatever He says? Will God fulfill whatever He says? Bet. And what is He expecting out of the others? Same thing. And so, covenants were binding, strongly binding for the people. Now, part of the promise was, you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. Spoke that to Abraham. Abraham had no children. He was already beyond the age of bearing children. But that was one of the promises. And that's one of the promises that was fulfilled. And so, as in other times, there were name changes because of the circumstances of what they were doing. I will give you and to your offspring. So that's including even the Jews of the first century. After the land of your sojourning, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. Verse 8. The term everlasting sounds eternal. And there are several places where it speaks of this kind of a commitment, eternal commitment. And in that commitment, or as you watch and you follow the history, it becomes less and less significant, but it becomes less and less obvious. But he makes the promise, and he says this is going to be. I've also always kind of considered the fact that there's a promise that continues through Christ, not the very same one, not the territory, but a promises of blessing and promises of provisions and things of that nature. But God made a covenant. Who broke it? Well, the Jews did. At that point in time, God has He's got something to do here with that covenant. I don't know that the covenant is even still legitimate after it's broken from one side. Do you have a concept of that? And if that's the case, that too. But the idea that it was going to be something that lasted a long time. Now, so we will hear of this promise, way back. We're hearing about it here in Acts chapter 7. 2,000 years ago. This must be pretty important. Because if Abraham did not receive all of these things, all these promises, then we'd still be waiting in Egypt until they arose over Egypt another king who did not know Joseph. What happened to the Abraham and his seed in Egypt at that time? Yeah, it got bad. When they upped the ante on what they had to do. They took things away from them that could have made their job a little bit easier. But they were slaves, living in the land of Goshen. But they were slaves. They were to do whatever the Egyptians sent to Egypt. How many days they went? 75, I think. I'm going to see if I can find it quickly, but no. Yeah, it was 75. How many were a part of it or who came out of Egypt? This is an astounding story. So this nation, how long had they been in Egypt? 400 years in Egypt. And so they grew, they were blessed, they were very fruitful, they were protected by God, and so they have several years of some real hard time when the king or the Pharaoh changes. He dealt shrewdly with our race, Stephen is telling. Very soon is going to come to the application